Yes, yes, yes. Welcome, welcome, everyone. We appreciate you joining us on this important discussion regarding how we're going to rise and thrive through this pandemic together. Thank you to all the attendees, presenters, and elected officials. We welcome each and every one of you, and we have a tremendous respect for those coming from different backgrounds and spaces. I'm going to kick it off, though, before we get into this thing. I'm going to kick it off by turning it over to Ruby Rivera to talk about language justice.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to let you all know that we have interpretation options because we want to make sure this event is accessible. We will be asking everyone on the Zoom channel, on the Zoom webinar, to please choose the English option. To please choose the option of the language that you are most comfortable in. There will be English, Spanish, Armenian, Korean, and Mandarin. For folks watching us on Facebook Live, if you need interpretation into any of those languages, please join us in the Zoom webinar. The link will be posted in the comments shortly. Now I will hand it over to Edgar, our Spanish interpreter, to get us started. Thank you.
Bienvenidos a todos, un placer estar acá con ustedes. Para hoy, el día de hoy, en esta reunión, tendremos una disponibilidad de interpretación en diferentes idiomas. El día de hoy usted podrá disfrutar de español, armenio, coreano y mandarín. Si usted está con nosotros vía Facebook, por favor, si necesita, únase a nuestro enlace de Zoom que será publicado en la configuración del chat.
Բարի գալուստ բոլորին, որպեսզի լսել հաղորդման հայերեն թարգմանությունը, խնդրում ենք սեղմեք երկրագունդ պատկերակը և ընտրեք հայերեն տարբերակը.
통역 서비스를 이용하시려면 지구본 아이콘을 클릭하시고 필요하신 언어를 선택해 주세요. 통역이 가능한 언어는 영어, 스페인어, 아르메니아어, 한국어, 중국어입니다. 스페인어, 아르메니아어, 한국어, 중국어로 통역이 필요하시면 줌 미팅으로 참여해 주세요. 감사합니다.
Yes, and thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone. Who are we? Oh, is there one more?
Sorry. One more.
Okay.
Okay, and so just a reminder, everyone will need to choose a language. The globe will appear right now that we have finished giving instructions in all languages. You can turn interpretation on now.
Hey,
so you will now see the globe.
The Mandarin interpreter hasn't done it, hasn't given out the instruction. Hey. Okay, that's okay.
Thank you.
Are we ready to move forward?
So now the globe should appear. Everyone on the webinar, please pick the language that you are most comfortable in. If you are most comfortable listening in English, please click English on the globe as well. Thank you. You're good.
Kick us off, Pastor Q.
All right. So hello, everybody. Once again, Healthy LA is a network of about 330 advocacy organizations, worker centers, labor unions, service providers, religious congregations, community groups, affordable housing developers, public interest lawyers, public health and safety organizations, and many more uniting to address the devastating social and economic impact of the pandemic and to achieve just relief, recovery, and reconstruction. Indeed. So over the past 9 months, we've achieved many wins for those most affected by the vicious pandemic, including passing emergency tenant protections at the city and county levels. But we are here today because we know these protections and the relief efforts offered to our communities are not enough. Millions of tenants and homeowners across the country are demanding a cancellation of rent. That's right, they're demanding a cancellation of rent and mortgages. And in LA, we're working hard to make sure this is a reality. So on our agenda today, up next, we are going to hear from Ray, who will tell us more about this issue. We'll hear testimonies from people impacted by this pandemic. We're going to watch a video that will tell us about the policy solutions we need, and we'll hear a discussion from community members and advocates and elected officials on the details of our proposal and what we need to make it happen. Take it away, Ray.
Thank you so much, Pastor Q. Yes, why are we here? As you know, as we all know, as we all have been experiencing being at home and oftentimes stuck behind our four walls, this pandemic is a historic and devastating public health and economic emergency. And in particular, it's been hitting our low-income communities of color the hardest, many of whom have already been displaced before because of racist policing and economic and housing policies. And now they are at risk of being displaced again. This pandemic is also having a devastating financial impact on tenants, low-income homeowners, and small landlords alike. More than half of all the people in Los Angeles experience a COVID-related loss of income, and hundreds of thousands of tenants are behind on rent. The rent debt crisis is disproportionately affecting our low-income people of color. Low-income households were 5.5 times as likely to miss rental payments than affluent households during COVID-19. Black and Latinx renters are 2 to 2.5 times more likely to be behind on rent. Our existing eviction protections have allowed tenants to shelter in place, but they do not address the massive accumulating unpaid rent debt in communities. Our rental assistance programs have simply just not reached enough people. At some point, the bill for unpaid rent will be due, if not already. And low-income tenants who are already severely rent burdened and still without a steady income simply will not be able to pay it back. They will end up homeless, on the streets, or mired in a cycle of debt for years. Just this past Monday, I sat with a family who were taken out of their homes, and now they are houseless. Rent cancellation, along with targeted assistance for low-income homeowners and landlords, is the only just and scaled policy solution to promote public health and shift the rent debt burden away from tenants, while maintaining the stability of our housing stock and preventing a wealth transfer to the corporations that have profited off of our neighborhoods and our homes for way too long. Low-income people who have borne the brunt of this pandemic need relief now and will need relief tomorrow. Rent and mortgage cancellation is the only way. Rent was due this week for the 9th time during the pandemic. We're in the middle of this devastating surge in cases that Dr. Farrer just called the most difficult moment in the pandemic. And still people cannot pay their rents, cannot pay their mortgages. Still people are being evicted out of their homes. Now, we applaud the county and city for implementing eviction protections at the beginning of the pandemic. But we know that further local action is absolutely necessary as this crisis deepens. And we have an opportunity, LA County, to step it up and model this for the rest of our nation. We can be the first ones to show that we know how to live and love and rise up together as one full, human, loving community where all actually have homes and all can live with dignity. So we are here today. We are here to demand that we cancel rent and cancel mortgages. We can do this. This is the only way that we can stop the continued displacement of our communities of color, of all people, and make sure that all of Los Angeles rises up through this pandemic and we end this pandemic stronger than the way we started it. At this moment, I'd love to introduce the first testimony to share exactly what we are experiencing. So Nancy Martinez is going to share her story, and thank you so much for being willing to share and be courageous enough to tell your story, because we need to hear it. We know that yours is not the only one in this moment. Nancy Martinez.
¿Me escucha?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, Nancy.
Okay, sorry. Hi. Mi nombre es Nancy Martínez. Yo vivo en el distrito 2 del condado de Los Ángeles. Soy inquilina y líder con Saje. Soy mamá de 3 niños pequeños y soy ama de casa, y pues mi esposo trabaja en la costura. Estoy aquí para hacer un llamado a nuestros representantes de la ciudad y del condado para que nos ayuden o cancelen la renta. Mi familia perdió el único ingreso en marzo, cuando comenzó la pandemia, y pues nos ha afectado mucho. En esa fábrica mi esposo lo descansaron desde marzo y sin fecha de regreso. La compañía regresó, pero a él lo descansaron indefinidamente. Mi esposo ha buscado trabajo, pero no ha encontrado. Él corre riesgo de contagiarse porque él tiene problemas de salud. Yo de mi parte, pues yo ayudo aquí desde mi casa, cuido a mis hijos y busco ayuda donde dan comida para ayudarme un poco. Y pues con mis niños aquí hacemos gelatinas y las vendemos. No hemos podido pagar la renta desde que comenzó la pandemia en marzo. Y yo recibí ayuda, aunque recibí ayuda de la asistencia de renta, pues no es suficiente, porque la deuda es muy grande. O sea, para cubrir esa deuda no es suficiente. Ya hoy debo $10,000 y pues mi deuda sigue creciendo. Yo quiero que cancelen la renta, ya que aunque me den de plazo un año, eso no va a ser suficiente, porque yo tendría que pagar $1,400, que es mi renta mensual, más la deuda atrasada. Entonces, pues no voy a poder pagar, aunque voy a correr el riesgo de que me desalojen. Entonces, la cancelación de la renta, de esta deuda, de las hipotecas, yo creo que sería una buena solución para la gente que trabajadora, que trabajamos día con día y que hoy nos hemos visto afectados. Por eso yo le exijo a Holly Mitchell y a todos los supervisores que por favor introduzcan la póliza para cancelar la renta este 8 de diciembre para que mi familia y muchas otras familias que están en la misma situación que yo, pues puedan vivir tranquilas, en paz, sin preocupación de que estamos endeudados y por esa deuda pues, puedan ser desalojados, porque no tendríamos a dónde irnos y ir con nuestros niños. Gracias.
Hi.
Next, we'll be hearing from Tanya, who is a homeowner here in Los Angeles. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. Y muchas gracias, señora Nancy. Greetings, everybody. My name is Tanya. I'm a Mexican-American artist who is in the collections of LACMA and the Hammer Museum, and a first-time homeowner in East Los Angeles. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about how COVID-19 has impacted my ability to pay my mortgage. As a small business owner, all of my 2020 and 2021 jobs were either canceled or postponed indefinitely in March due to COVID-19. Because of this, I was forced to lay off all of my employees whom had full-time positions with me for over 6 years. I am still trying to pay back rent I owe my studio landlord so I can hold on to my business. I have been able to float by with COVID grants from various nonprofits and a small business PPP loan, which helped me to briefly rehire my employees for 6 weeks. We use their 6 weeks of employment to look for, apply, and try to land new jobs to get back on our feet. Since every sector I do business with, such as museums, universities, and hotels, were and are still so impacted, we were unable to secure any jobs. During my PPP loan period, I myself was unable to get paid since I had never been on my own payroll. and the PPP loan made me ineligible to apply for or receive unemployment benefits. I am a mother, and because I had no jobs, no income, and was unable to get unemployment, the only way my family could keep food on the table was because I am a homeowner who was able to get mortgage forbearance. My husband works in retail and cannot afford to pay our mortgage on his own. But with the forbearance, we were able to take care of our essential needs, such as food and medication. I have just landed my first job after 8 months. Because of this job, I just applied to go back into repayment for my mortgage and student loans. I still have to homeschool and care for my child full time while trying to perform my job at the same time. Making and earning money is twice as difficult as before. Without the safety of my mortgage forbearance, which allowed my family to save money for the first time ever, we would have lost our home, my business, and career, and would not have been able to put food on the table. Please, please, I implore you to do the humane thing, the right thing. This pandemic is too much for any of us to survive without the help of our leaders. We need rent and mortgage aid at the very least to help us get enough food on the table, to help calm at least just one worry that this pandemic has caused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your story. And we know that there's so many other families and homeowners just like yourself who's really struggling through this season. Our last testimony is going to come from Fanny Ortiz. So we invite you now to share your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ray. Hi, everybody. My name is Fanny Ortiz. I live in Boyle Heights, and I'm a single mother of 5 with my youngest of special needs. I'm a member with CPC, Community Power Collective, and also with SEIU Local 2015. Prior to the pandemic, myself and many people in my community were already suffering from the lack of resources to accessing housing with dignity. The majority of people in my community need 2 to 3 jobs to pay rent and place food on our tables. I myself need 2 jobs to pay rent, even though I live in affordable housing. When I lost my second job in May of this year, I found myself choosing food over paying the rent. I also now must pay for high quality internet access to provide my kids access to their schools. I am already in an economic crisis, not being able to pay rent since May 2020 due to COVID-19. And with the poverty wages we get paid, I feel like I will never be able to recover from the pandemic financially. Although my landlord has been understanding because they are an affordable housing developer, I'm also afraid that they will lose the building if they can't pay the mortgage. What has happened to us is not our fault. It is not fair that so many tenants are facing eviction and that some small landlords could lose their property. And I could end up also losing my home because of that. What will I do during a health pandemic with 5 children out on the streets? That's what I participated as a member of Community Power Collective in the development of the policy proposal we are talking about today. Because canceling rent and mortgages means saving lives. Lives like mine and the lives of my children. Thank you.
Now, those were powerful testimonies, and as the pastor of the Church Without Walls in Skid Row, we know that these stories are real, and they're real close to my heart because we're noticing that there are more people on the streets. We know that over 1.8 million people, right, over 1 million people were at risk, and that's working people, by the way, were at risk of being houseless prior to the pandemic. And now you're hearing what the effects of the pandemic on top of the pandemic that we were already dealing with, and that's houselessness. And now the pandemic is about to get worse. So keep those powerful testimonies at heart as we move forward in this conversation. The reason why tenants, homeowners and advocates have been working together for months to develop the policy proposals we need to support those most impacted by the pandemic. Those are the stories that you
աջակցելու
just heard.
նրանց ովքեր ամենա
And so next, we're going to watch a video that talks about our policy platform. It was animated by Boyle Heights Youth. Shout out to Cassandra. We're also going to be dropping a link in our cancel rent and mortgages policy platform summary in the chat. So check that out. And after the video, we're going to continue the conversation with tenants, property owners, advocates, and elected officials on what we need to do to get this done. Let's check out the video.
In LA County, the health and financial impacts of this pandemic have been devastating, and the burden is being placed on those without a safety net: seniors, the undocumented, low-income people of color. Hundreds of thousands have lost income and are behind on rent. Eviction protections, while crucial, are only delaying a massive rent debt crisis, and rental assistance programs have barely made a dent. Thousands of tenants will be facing eviction once state protections expire on January 31st. Many homeowners and small landlords are also struggling to pay their mortgages, making them vulnerable to foreclosure or bankruptcy and creating the conditions for corporate landlords to buy up our neighborhoods and continue displacing tenants. We've already lost over 7,500 people in LA County to the COVID-19 virus, and housing insecurity is putting thousands more at risk. Rent cancellation, along with targeted assistance for low-income homeowners and landlords, is the only just and scaled policy solution that upholds public health and shifts the rent debt burden away from tenants, while also maintaining housing stability and stopping a wealth transfer to corporations. So what do we mean when we say cancel rent? Yes, we do mean the suspension of all existing rent debt and future rent obligations. Tenants should not be held responsible for rent debt owed due to COVID-related income loss, and if our best bet for combating this virus is to shelter in place, then future rent obligations should be canceled to remove financial pressures that are forcing people to leave their home and or putting them at risk of eviction for non-payment. All existing rent debt and all future rent obligations should be suspended until our county has reached the minimum COVID-19 risk tier under the governor's criteria, with a free vaccine widely available and until there has been substantial economic recovery. All tenants who are experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19 should be eligible, regardless of immigration status. The city and county must implement strong protections for tenants whose rent has been canceled. Landlords shouldn't be able to evict tenants for having their rent canceled, and there should be significant penalties for harassment. What do we mean when we say cancel mortgages? Yes, we also think homeowners experiencing hardship should have their mortgage payments canceled. There is a lot that the county and city can do to support mortgage cancellation and relief right now. For example, the city and county do a lot of business with banks and have a lot of power as consumers. They can put pressure on banks by choosing to only do business with those who provide mortgage forgiveness. As some vulnerable homeowners navigate their options, there will be those who try to take advantage of them. The county and city can also penalize predatory mortgage lending and bad servicing practices to protect homeowners from bad deals. The county and city can also provide local funding for homeowner counseling to help homeowners negotiate with the banks and make sure they are set up for long-term stability. And county and city officials should be working with advocates to put pressure on state and federal governments to provide mortgage cancellation and relief. We understand that small landlords are also struggling and may be at risk of losing their properties, which also puts tenants at risk of displacement. A local fund should be established to provide financial relief to certain qualifying landlords to mitigate the economic impact of rent cancellation and ensure housing stability. This fund should support small landlords and nonprofit housing providers who can demonstrate financial hardship due to rent cancellation, who need assistance to prevent losing the property and or need assistance to keep up with maintenance and operations. This fund is not meant to recover profits, and large corporate landlords should not be eligible. Landlords can receive as much as they need to keep up with payment and keep the building habitable, but not to exceed the amount of rent cancellation and not double dip with other relief funds. Landlords should only receive funds if tenant protection and habitability standards are met. Good landlords without a history of tenant harassment or habitability issues should be prioritized for relief. Landlords who violate these conditions should receive penalties and should reimburse the funds. Tenants, homeowners, and advocates have worked together for months to develop this proposal because we know housing is health, and we need action from our elected officials to save lives by keeping people housed. The city and county have the power to do this today. Let's make sure they get it done. To learn more about this policy proposal and to take action in support of canceling rent and mortgages in LA, visit healthyla.org.
Wow. So everyone, what an amazing and concise illustration of what we mean when we say cancel rent and mortgages and the platform of Healthy LA. Just checking for interpretation. We're okay? All right. Thank you to everyone who worked on that amazing video. And also a shout out to the testimonials that spoke just a couple of moments ago. It is truly their testimony, Nancy's, Tanya's, and Fanny's, that contextualize why we need to cancel rent and cancel mortgages. Folks, my name is Pamela Agustin. I'm a community organizer with the Eastside Leads Coalition based in Boyle Heights. Our coalition fights for tenant protections, but also we believe that any investment that comes to the East Side must be grounded in the needs of local residents. Okay, just checking, I thought I heard something. For the needs of local residents. My role coming up is to moderate conversation. We're gonna dive deeper into what it means to cancel rent and mortgages, demystify it. There's a lot of questions about what it means, who does it impact, what will it take? We are going to spend 45 minutes in this conversation. We have invited 6 amazing guests to help us demystify, get nerdy with this issue, and get us engaged on how we get this done for the city of LA and the county. We will carve a path forward, and all of you are going to be a part of that. First, we're going to invite back Fanny Ortiz, who you heard from a couple moments ago. She is a community organizer and a tenant in Boyle Heights. We are also going to hear from Walter Cabrera. He is a small landlord from Southeast Los Angeles. And of course, we're going to have our elected officials and government representatives. So please, here they are. First, we have Council Member Mike Bonin from the 11th District of the City of Los Angeles. Hello, Council Member.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Councilmember Bonin, you really have been an early supporter of Healthy LA and the call to cancel rent. So we're really excited that you're joining us.
I'm glad to be here, and I want to thank Healthy LA for the great coalition building and advocacy. It's what we need.
Awesome. I'm going to continue listing out our speakers, but we're going to get started shortly, of course. We also have our LA City Council Member-elect, Nithya Raman. Hello, Nithya. Hello, Council Member. Yes. So Council Member Nithya Raman was recently elected. She's representing the 4th District of the City of LA. She has also been a strong supporter for canceling rent. She brings today some
some details about how we can do this while supporting small landlords, and of course also other affordable housing landlords in that process. So thank you, Councilmember Rahman.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. We also have with us Guadalupe Duran Medina, representing Supervisor Hilda Solis of LA County. Hi, Guadalupe.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us.
And Ms. Duran Medina serves as the planning deputy, folks, for the Supervisor Solis's office. So these are our 6 speakers for today. I'm gonna ask our speakers, we have 40, oh no, we have one more actually, one more, how could I forget? Our longtime Healthy LA member, also attorney with public counsel, Faisa Malik. Hi, Faisa.
Good to be here, thank you.
Yes, Faisa, I know you've been providing a lot of support for this Cancel Rent platform, and thank you for your legal and policy support. So to our 6 speakers, again, we have 45 minutes. We're gonna get nerdy. We look forward to all of everything that you bring. But before we get started, I wanna remind everybody watching that we heard powerful testimonies. We also heard from our presenters, from Reverend Ray, really setting the context, giving us details as to why we need to cancel rent and mortgages. It is not an understatement to say that keeping people housed, that keeping families housed is sometimes, and it really is, a matter of life or death. I want to highlight a recent UCLA study that came out not too long ago that shared that in areas and states where eviction protections have expired, this led to a rise in COVID-19 cases of upwards of 400,000. And unfortunately, it also led to over 10,000 deaths. Housing is, of course, health. Housing is, of course, life when we see details like that. We need to cancel rent to keep families safe. We need to cancel rent to keep families and communities thriving. So in order to kick off our conversation, I invite Fanny to ask the first question. Fanny, please.
Thanks, Pamela. I'm not going to be able to pay back even a quarter of what is due after the pandemic is over. What will you be able to do to help me, my family, and the hundreds of thousands of tenants in a situation similar to mine?
Thanks, Fanny. Thank you for the question, and thank you for your powerful testimony earlier. There's a lot we need to do, and there's a lot we must do. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and it's a question of who, and it's a question of how. The city in so many ways has, I think, failed to acknowledge the severity of this economic crisis, how deep it is and how profound and long lasting it's going to be. And so I think some of our steps have not been as bold as they have been. Earlier this year, we did a partial but not quite comprehensive eviction moratorium. Last week, we started the process of an anti-tenant harassment ordinance, but we haven't crossed the finish line on that yet. We have done some rent relief, but it's certainly not enough to meet the demand of this moment. And what we need to be doing is, I think it's quite clear, is we need to be, as a matter of survival for families in Los Angeles, we need to be canceling rent and we need to be canceling mortgage. I don't think we know yet all of the details of what that proposal will look like, but Nithya and I and Supervisor Solis have been talking with Healthy LA and with public counsel, and we are very interested in finding a proposal that works for Los Angeles, for tenants and for small landlords, and getting it passed here in Los Angeles. And I think it is something we should be doing. Frankly, the federal government should be doing it, but if they're not, we have to step up, because these are our neighbors, these are our grandparents, these are our friends who are suffering, and it's the responsibility of the city to step in, and I hope we're able to do that in the next few months.
Thank you, council member. Actually, council member, you mentioned before we got started, you'd like to be called Mike. May
Yes,
I?
please.
Of course. And also to our speakers, if there's a preferred way that we should address each other in these next 45 minutes, please share it. But Mike, you mentioned, that there are other agencies responsible. You also shared that council member like Nithya has also been involved in those conversations. So I want to invite her. Nithya, please tell us a little more. What do you think about what Mike just shared?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I also want to put it in the context of what's happening right now in Los Angeles. We're seeing a huge rise in COVID cases. We're seeing that huge surge come. And I feel like a lot of the responsibility for that surge is being placed on individual decisions and on individual irresponsibility. But what I've been seeing when I look around and when I speak to people, when I hear stories, when I read stories in the papers, is that people are going back to work because they're feeling the pressures of rent. They're feeling the pressures of the debt that their families are facing, and they're putting themselves in risky situations because they're fearing what might be a worse option, which is homelessness for themselves and for their families, displacement from their homes. And so I think it's incredibly important to take this as seriously as possible, not just because we want to make sure that we're emerging from this pandemic healthy and vital, but because we want to stay healthy right now, because we want to keep people healthy at this moment. And I think it's incredibly important that we're having this conversation tonight at the height of the pandemic here in Los Angeles. And I really think it's so important also to think about, as this proposal has done, to put a light on the inclusion of small landlords and to make sure that small landlords are protected as we are talking about rent cancellation, as we're talking about protections for tenants, to also be talking about the so-called mom and pop landlords that you hear about so much. What happened during 2008, during the last fiscal crisis that we had here, was that it was a housing crisis. And a lot of these smaller landlords, many of whom are landlords of color, they lost homes, and landlords of color were affected, and homeowners of color were affected and impacted more than other families were. And I think that's really important to remember at this time, and to make sure that we are protecting smaller landlords from being bought up by big corporations that can then become more aggressive landlords in the future. So I think this is not just a question of rent at this moment. It's also a question of health at this moment. It's also a question of protecting us into the future, not just right now.
Thank you, Nithya. It's today and the future. I love that. Thank you. So Guadalupe, you just heard from the city of LA, the two representatives. Guadalupe, what are you hearing at the county level?
Well, I
When
agree
we
with
say, yeah.
I agree with both council members, Roman and Mike, and for the county, we have also been again very concerned, given again we foresee a lot of eviction actions, and we know that we've had eviction moratoriums that have attempted to protect, but we know at some point there's going to be a time to pay the bill, right? And we know that we need to we understand we need to put something together. We know that rent cancellation and mortgage cancellation, we need to have something holistic that not just addresses the tenants, but also the small landlords. And we know that, legally, we also want to make sure, we're very interested in seeing how a legal pathway can be established to carry out something of this sort. We know that we need resources because although we don't have an exact number, how much the impact is, we know it's a big number. And it's going to be a number that will be, huge, that, beyond what the county and the city alone can handle. So we understand that there's going to be a need to really advocate and also look towards the state and the federal for resources. That is going to be needed. And, you know, apart from finding a legal pathway, we need to have resources, and we have to make sure it's holistic, right? And so I know that in terms of, you know, the county, you know, we're actually going to be, you know, we have our moratorium, and we also have had a responsible banking motion that basically gave birth to a mortgage assistance or mortgage relief program for landlords, small landlords, 4 units and less. And so we're happy that that has taken off. It's a small, you know, program, 5 million, but we know we need something much greater than that. And so we're very interested in seeing how we could work together with the city and the county on how we could, you know, pursue something later on, you know, in terms of, you know, putting something together and that it be legally, you know, feasible and again, holistic. So just want to, you know, we are very concerned.
Thank you for that, Guadalupe. And I heard 5 million mortgage relief program. Guadalupe, do you know if it's a desire to continue that program in the future? You also mentioned the interim emergency tenant protections. I'd like to put a pin on that one and address it in another question. But right now, for folks that might not know, can you share a little more about that 5 million mortgage relief program?
Right, that it's meant to help, again, small landlords, 4 units or less, owners of 4 units or less. And it provides, you know, a connection with the HUD counselors and also to seek, you know, forbearances. And so through our Department of Consumer Business Affairs, that program, you know, is being designed, you know, to be launched very soon. And I know our department has been working very closely with the Healthy LA members and the neighborhood housing services from your group in regards to that. So we're hoping to have that launch very soon.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And I want to just readdress our tenant concerns. So I'm going to go back to that, to our speakers. Guadalupe, you ended it with a little bit more of the detail of who's eligible for that support for the mortgage relief. Now I'm curious, who is eligible for rent cancellation? So Fanny, what have you heard? What is it that community residents would like to see prioritized for rent cancellation? And also I'd like to hear from Faisa. Faisa, what do we mean, right, when we say eligibility for rent cancellation? But at this time, Fanny, por favor.
Thank you. I also want to raise the fact that undocumented tenants have been largely excluded from relief.
Yeah.
Few, if any, were eligible for the LA Regional COVID Fund. They didn't get unemployment, and they certainly didn't get the federal stimulus check. Are they also going to be covered?
And that, I think, Faisa,
Sure. So to answer your question, Fanny, yes, all tenants, regardless of immigration status, should benefit from rent cancellation. In terms of eligibility, we're proposing it to be broad. If you're a tenant who's experienced hardship and you can't pay your rent, you should be able to get your rent forgiven for the whole emergency. What makes rent cancellation so effective is that it can cover more people. It's scaled. And it shifts the burden away from tenants who can't pay and up the ladder to entities who can carry more of the burden: government, banks, large corporate entities. This kind of shifting of benefits and burdens to promote the public good is what governments do. That is within their police powers, and it's necessary right now.
Thank you, Faisa. Mike, what are your thoughts when you hear who is eligible? What does it mean for eligibility and rent cancellation? Do you think, council member, like we heard from Fanny and Faisa, that regardless of immigration status, like anybody who's facing this hardship should be eligible? Just want to hear your thoughts from your constituents. I think actually, I think we have a little tech issue. I want to ask the same question to Nithya. Nithya, can you tell us what comes to your mind when you hear about eligibility and the most vulnerable communities being supported?
Yes, I really have to echo what Faisa said here, which is really that at least in the ways that I was thinking about this issue over the campaign, we really wanted to think of a policy approach that took the pressure off of tenants as much as possible, and really placed more of that responsibility for benefits onto landlords. I do see that Mike is back.
Yeah.
He wanted to also speak to this question of eligibility and rent.
Happy to. Thank you, Nithya. We are experiencing what AT&T is saying is a public safety related power failure. So I'm on with my phone and I've got a flashlight if I need to use lighting. So hopefully I'll be here to stay.
COVID times.
Well, somebody doesn't like me talking about canceling rent and mortgages, apparently. I think it is extremely important that we cover people who are undocumented. I don't think there are undocumented Angelenos and documented Angelenos. There are Angelenos, and we need to be helping them. There was some legal issue previously about using public funds for people who are undocumented. That's not an issue here, because this is, under the way we would do this in the city, this is an emergency action to help people. This is a relief measure, and it's not a use of public funds. It's the suspension or the cancellation of rent and mortgages. So I think everybody should be eligible for it morally, and I think everybody should be eligible for it legally. And I think an important argument to make to those who may say, oh, no, we.
Yes, I'm going to put yes, thumbs up to that. Morally, legally, I think I'm hearing consensus from all of our speakers. Thank you. When Councilmember Bonin, Mike returns, we'll continue the conversation with him. But another issue that I personally hear as an organizer in the East Side, a member of East Side Leads, member of Stay Housed LA County, that is going out and informing tenants about their rights, is actually the growing concern, the growing stories around harassment that tenants are facing. This is real. There's been illegal lockouts. We see our comrades in the Autonomous Tenants Union responding, Healthy LA members also responding to these urgencies right now. Fanny, can you tell us a little more around this? What have you seen on the ground as an organizer, and what you hope the cancel mortgages policy addresses?
Yes. Well, I've been lucky that my landlord hasn't bothered me about not being able to pay rent, but many of my friends are being harassed constantly because they can't pay rent. They're being threatened, constant notices, even being locked out of their home, and things like putting chains on their doors to lock them out. It's like really scary, as if it wasn't bad enough with COVID. And it's scary especially for undocumented people, and many people are finding ways to pay rent even though they can't afford it by giving up food or medicine, just so they can avoid issues with the landlord. This isn't sustainable. Will landlords harass tenants even more for having their rent canceled? it's a question that many of us question ourselves.
Yeah. So I'll just jump in here. So it's really awful that one of the things that has emerged during this pandemic has been this increase in tenant harassment and illegal lockout.
Faisa, I apologize. Let me pause you. This is good. This is, I think, but please pause. Just a reminder to everyone, you have to choose your language of choice to be able to hear our guests. We are just addressing an issue that we heard also from members that's very important, right? Harassment and illegal lockout. So please, again, we ask you to choose your language of choice. If you speak English, select English. In the bottom right, there'll be a little globe. Select English. If you require a different language, Armenian, Korean, Spanish, Chinese, please select it. Faisa, we're just going to give 1 minute to see if folks are ready to hear us.
You're good.
We're good, Ruby?
You're good.
Okay, and to all of our panelists, I think we're doing great, but if you haven't, choose English. Please, thank you. Faisa, go ahead.
Sure. So as I was saying, we've seen a horrible increase in tenant harassment and illegal lockouts. I think they're almost daily now. And so we've been thinking a lot about this issue because one of the questions we've gotten from tenants is, if I tell my landlord that my rent is canceled, aren't they going to harass me more? And so there's a fear there. And so I think one thing that's absolutely essential to pair with rent cancellation is strong eviction protections for tenants whose rent is canceled. And so the eviction protections need to remain in place at both the city and the county level. It's also crucial that any policy includes enforcement mechanisms to ensure that no landlords try to harass tenants who have had their rent canceled. So private right of action, strong penalties. And finally, landlords should have to agree to not engage in harassment as a condition of receiving any landlord hardship funds. And I know this is something that the county has been thinking about too. And yes, just a shout out to the tenant harassment ordinance that is moving through the city.
Thank you, Faisa. Actually, before we continue, I want to turn it over to Mike. So Mike, just before that power failure, you were really getting into it and telling us about why this is important for all Angelenos, regardless of immigration status. So
yeah,
would you
as
like
I
to
was,
take yeah,
sure. As I was saying, you know, we're not undocumented or documented Angelenos, we're Angelenos. And as I said, we have both a moral and a legal ability to make sure that this applies to those who are documented and undocumented. And there are many who object to benefits going to those who are undocumented. But there's two arguments that are important, I think, to address that. One, this is an emergency relief. This is a public health emergency, and it's part of making sure that the public health of everyone in Los Angeles, regardless of their status or their zip code, is kept healthy and kept alive. It is also, I think, very important to note that this is, in addition to being a relief program for tenants, this is an economic stimulus package. It's probably one of the most significant economic stimulus packages we can approve because it will put money in the hands of people who are struggling so they can contribute back into the economy and to get our engine going here. And we certainly don't want, from any perspective, to be denying anybody the ability to contribute to the economy. So whether you're right or left or pro-immigrant or not, it's smart economics as well as sort of the smart thing to do morally to make sure this applies to everybody, regardless of immigration status.
thank you, Mike. Nithya, I saw you kind of like shifting. Is there something you want to share urgently? Because I'd like to hear from Walter.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. Walter, you know, you just heard a little bit about a stimulus package from Mike. You heard the concerns from Fanny. You heard about some increase, right, of other concerns around harassment and what we can do, right? Eviction
Yes.
protections, support. But how is this all? How are you taking it all in from your perspective of a small landlord in the Southeast LA?
Well,
Tell
as a
us.
small landlord, I purchased a home with my mother and my aunt here in Southeast LA. So we have a small unit in the back that we have 3 tenants. And it's very hard and scary to hear this because with 2 of my tenants that actually lost their jobs and also my mother losing her job, one of my tenants actually had to start selling things at the swap meet, and most of my tenants are like family to us. So we're trying to figure out how to go ahead and pay the mortgage. And with him going to the swap meet, he actually contracted COVID. And so with that being said, we had to quarantine. And it's just at times it feels that with everything that's going on in the world, it gets scary because it's one thing piling on top of another. But with that being said, I wish that I could pay the mortgage so my tenants don't have to deal with that. But it's not something that's feasible. Even trying to go ahead and get some repairs for everything to be better in the back units because they are a bit outdated, but not having the money to do that. So hearing canceling the rent, it is a bit scary because in my thought, it sometimes feels that it would be that I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage, or that I would lose my property. So that's just pretty much a bit of where I stand on that as well.
So Walter, I wanna make sure that we address that last concern that you share. I'm gonna jump a little bit. I want to hear from Faisa because Faisa mentioned some small landlord relief. I also know that this is an issue that Nithya and her team have also addressed. How can we support small landlords? So Faisa, do you want to share a little bit about the small landlord relief in our cancel rent proposal and cancel mortgages?
Sure. Sure. And I definitely want to give, Fanny the chance to, after I speak, to respond if she has any response. But I guess to speak to Walter's concerns, we definitely hear those. We have heard those. We've been working with advocates that work with homeowners and small landlords to craft this policy. And so that's why, in addition to canceling rent, the platform is proposing that there be a small landlord hardship fund for the exact reasons, and it would cover, maintenance, things that would be needed to keep the building and operations running. It's not about profit; it's about keeping housing stable. And I know a lot of landlords they don't want to evict their tenants. Most landlords, they don't want to evict their tenants; they want to keep them. And so we understand that it's a cash flow issue, especially for the small landlords. And so, and we're also proposing it, I think, because it doesn't help tenants if their rent is canceled, but then their landlord is forced to sell the property to a corporate landlord like Blackstone, and then the tenant has to deal later on with the steep rent hike and then an eviction later down the road after the pandemic. And so we want to avoid repeating the mistakes of the last financial crisis. And so a landlord hardship fund that's tailored to help the most vulnerable landlords, small landlords, nonprofit affordable housing providers, would help ensure stability and prevent a transfer of wealth to corporate interests and banks. And so as a note, when we're talking about small landlords, we mean landlords who own 4 units or less. That's how the city defines small landlords. And that's also the most vulnerable group of landlords. That's why it was targeted that way.
Faisa, it sounded like you passed the baton to Fanny.
I did.
Right. So Fanny, what do you say? What do you want to respond to Walter also?
Oh, Walter, I just want to say that as a tenant, I hear you, and I don't want you to lose your property. But as a tenant struggling to pay the rent, you're not getting rent payments now as it is. But making me responsible for the rent, that isn't going to help you because I don't have it. So canceling rent doesn't impact you in any more of a negative way than not getting rent now. Both of us need rent relief. Well, relief, because you would need mortgage and I would need rent relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. And I heard cash flow. I heard I heard from Walter, we are family, they are my family, but I hear this relationship, right, between Fanny, like you mentioned, like you and the relationship between landlord and tenant. But I wanna, what does it mean to assist hundreds of thousands of tenants? What does it mean to assist Walter and other small landlords? Nithya, I wanna give it back up to you right now to share a little more about what you and your team have been looking into.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different things that I wanted to address in thinking through what does this require.
Yes.
One is thinking about what are the costs of not taking this head on. You know, I think one of the things that I talked about throughout my campaign, you know, over the last 15 months is homelessness and the costs we're paying right now to address homelessness here in the city of Los Angeles. We're paying hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And in many ways, what we're seeing is that this rise in homelessness is directly connected to, in some ways, an unwillingness to invest in stopping the flow of people into homelessness, something that we are at risk of seeing a huge rise in after this eviction moratorium ends. And so, you know, I think it's really important to address the costs in the context of what we may be facing in terms of costs if we don't address it proactively. And this is really, you know, thinking through investing in rents and erasing rent debts for people, to me, is really an investment in a faster recovery for our future. And so I think it's incredibly important to put it into that context, to put it into a broader context of where we're going to be going and put it into a 5 or 10 year timeline. During the campaign, we also put forward some thoughts around what some funding sources for a program like this might look like. So one, we talked about this earlier when the first CARES Act funding had come in. Now that money has been spent, but I think that there is talk now at the federal level of another federal relief package. So there's debates happening about how big that federal relief package is going to be, but some of that money is certainly going to be coming to cities. And I think we should be looking to that federal relief package as a potential place to look at funding for exactly this kind of program. I also looked then at this thing called the Municipal Liquidity Fund, which was a lending program from the federal government that could have lent money to cities over 500,000 residents for exactly this kind of need, a COVID-related financial need that would help the city recover more quickly going forward. Unfortunately, the terms on that municipal liquidity fund ended up being quite bad for cities. And I'm excited to see that the City of Los Angeles City Council actually recently, through the budget committee, is now pushing to make those terms better, asking the federal government to make those terms significantly better, and thinking about ways in which the city can get access to all kinds of loans at better terms than what the Municipal Liquidity Fund is currently offering us. But I think the most important thing I wanted to offer at this moment is that I think this is a conversation that is very urgent. It cannot just be happening at the city. It cannot just be happening at the county. We need to be having those conversations together. And I'm so grateful that you're here, that we're all here together talking about this. I also think that the state needs to be involved. I just read recently that the state, which was looking at a massive budget deficit, just like the city was, is actually no longer looking at that budget deficit. So what do we do with that money? How do we use that money to address our city's more urgent needs? How do you use that money to address our most vulnerable residents' most urgent needs? I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to be happening, even as we are pushing the federal government to take urgent action that they should have taken months ago. So I think there's a few different ways in which we can think about this. One thing I want to say, which I think is really important here, that there is really a lack of data right now around what the extent of the need is and what is the real quantity of money that we need in order to be able to tackle this head on. And I know, Faiza, you've done some research on this, and I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit more about what that data looks like, what the gaps in that data are, and if there are ways for the city to now start collecting data which will make us more able to address tenants' needs well into the future, not just in this crisis, but in any future crisis that may come?
Thank you, Nithya. So to answer your question about data, I think we've seen there has been so much written recently about this eviction crisis, the eviction tsunami, UD Day, and the crisis that renters are facing. And there's the government has been doing a weekly, or I think it's every other week now, pulse survey. And so we have some pieces of data to work with, but there's no real perfect data source, and it's kind of evolving as the pandemic goes on. I mean, at the beginning, we didn't think it was going to last this long. And so people's circumstances have changed. I mean, we do know that more than half of all Evangelinos have lost household income. We know hundreds of thousands of tenants in LA are behind on rent. We know that 750,000 people in California are poised to stop receiving unemployment by the end of the year when CARES Act protections expire. We know that this is disproportionately impacting low-income people of color the most. We know the rent crisis is hitting those at the lowest incomes, while those at the top are doing fine. I think the visual that's been used is the K-shaped recovery. The people are at the top are actually making money and property values are increasing, but people at the bottom are doing worse. And so if you look at the maps of which populations are most vulnerable to COVID and those that of the most vulnerable renters in this crisis, it's the same map. That's what's just so devastating to see. And you know exactly where help is needed and where we need to be targeting this. And then just to answer the question about unpaid rent in LA, I mean, that's been a hard estimate, and we've been kind of trying to crunch some numbers ourselves. Some people are only 1 month behind, some people are 6 months, many people have been making partial payments. And I think most recently, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia estimated that the unpaid rent in California was 1.7 billion. But we're not proposing, I mean, it sounds like a really big number, right? Like we have to reimburse $1.7 billion of unpaid rent debt. And I don't think that that's necessary. And that's not what we're proposing. And many landlords are doing fine, that's why. The vast majority, 80% of tenants are still paying rent. Instead, if the city and county adopt our proposal for a landlord hardship fund, I think we're talking more about hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. And that also might seem like a lot of money, but just as a comparison, the city and the county collectively already allocated over 200 million in their rental assistance programs that went to landlords. And I think this is basically that. It would just be called a landlord hardship fund.
Wow, Faisa, those are interesting and powerful numbers. And Nithya, thank you for, I saw your excitement. I think I saw your excitement in sharing this is how the state get involved, how the federal government can get involved. And there is definitely a regional approach needed. And I would like our viewers and myself really to learn more about that regional approach, those ideas. I actually want to pass it now to Mike. Mike, you also mentioned this in your remarks. So how do you see the state? How do you see the federal government getting involved? Maybe what are some nuggets that you heard from Nithya that maybe today's right now sparked a different idea for you?
Well, the biggest thing that's been sparked for me is how excited I am to start working with Nithya officially in a week or so. It's going to be really cool. And with Healthy LA, the legislative item about changing the lending terms that she mentioned, which is exciting, was an idea that came to us from the Healthy LA Coalition. So there's a great partnership between grassroots organizations and the city that can make change, because we need the change to be coming at the grassroots level, city, county, state, and federal. The easiest way to do this would be federal. If the Congress would pass Ilhan Omar's Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. Don't know if that's going to happen. I'm certainly not holding my breath. So we need to act, and we need to get the state to act. We have at the city level and at the county level more of an ability to have an impact on canceling rent. We have a smaller ability through a potential hardship program to influence mortgages. The state has much more ability to do things on mortgages. They have more legislative ability to do it. And they could be encouraging banks to forgive mortgage obligations, or at the very least requiring forbearance. But we need to be clear that there's two types of actions that the state can take, that the county can take, and the city can take. There's legislative things we can do to require and to mandate, and then there's things we can do to leverage the power that we have, which is more of an indirect action. So at the city, we have a responsible banking ordinance, and we passed that in 2012, and we've revised it since. And it requires that banks doing business with the city that handle all of our money disclose detailed data on loans and foreclosure activity. And with 30 billion in assets and 6 billion in deposits and pension funds, we've got dozens of contracts with financial institutions. We should be able to encourage or leverage the banks to increase their lending and to increase their mortgage forgiveness. What this is going to require, really, of the state, of the city, of the county, is to get out of our typical legislative comfort zone and do things differently and do things that are a little more outside the box. But the moment demands that we get outside of our legislative comfort zone, because the people in Los Angeles, in California, in this country, in this crisis, they are not in a living comfort zone. And we need to be going the extra mile and taking the extra steps to help people through this moment.
Thank you, Mike. Guadalupe, we heard, just to continue on this train of what can be done regionally. What do you think about that, getting out of our legislative comfort zone, or even the idea of a responsible banking ordinance? Is that something that the county's also considering?
Well, at the county, we actually just embarked on that this year, and so it's something that we're just starting. Like I said, we are interested in looking at how we can what conditions we could put on banks to bank with us. We know that there's only 6 banks that the county can bank with. So it's a very small, circle, if you will. So those are things to consider. But we also see, as we started in this conversation, our departments, with the banks, that gave birth to the, the mortgage relief fund, and so that was a helpful outcome of that. And so I know that currently, at the county, we're in the midst of contracting with someone to actually look into developing a scorecard. And so we're just taking off in that respect, but we definitely see opportunities, and that we're willing to explore further, and how that can help us with all of this.
Mm-hmm. I definitely added another question there when I passed it to you, and that was getting out of our legislative comfort zone. Guadalupe, who do you think in all of the ideas that you've heard today, the cancel rent mortgages conversation, who do we need to talk to at the county? And I want Nithya and Mike to also start preparing, like, who do we need to contact in the city to get some of these ideas moving? Guadalupe, if you can share your thoughts on that.
In regards to the banking?
In regards to
everything.
To everything. I mean, you heard I heard a lot of great ideas being tossed around right now, and numbers. So who do we need to get on our side?
No, I mean, again, I think, at the county, there's 5 supervisors, right? So that's going to be very important to, gather more and more support or see the need of doing something. Again, given, you know, Councilmember Bonin and Raman, you know, there's a need to create a, you know, a cooperation between the city and the county. I think that that's going to be very important for us to provide and create something that could work seamlessly across all the areas, right? That's going to be important. And so gathering, you know, the support of other members of our boards and city council, right? That's going to be very important, because in order to pass something, to make something happen, we know we have to get the support, you know, the votes. That's the reality, right? It's a reality we live in as well. And so I think the more we can reach out and, you know, to the other, you know, the different elected officials, and also make those bridges, like you said, with not just the county, the city, but also with the state and the federal. We need to have those, create those, you know, relationships and you know, collaborations, I think, to make this happen. And so, you know, those are real, you know, those are important to consider, definitely.
Nithya, getting out of our legislative comfort zone, as Mike put it. Yeah, I think you shared some, but could you share repeat another highlight? Who do you think needs to be involved? And then we also, Walter, I'll toss it back to you in a moment.
Okay. No worries.
Yes. Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
Well, you know, I don't have a legislative comfort zone yet because I've never been a legislator yet. So I'm looking forward to having a comfort zone soon. But I guess I would just say, having come off of an election where we did a lot of voter outreach, where we did a lot of voter education about the powers of the city and about what's possible, I think that employing as part of the process that you all are doing, which I think is already so enormous. There are hundreds of people in this teach-in, which is just phenomenal already. But I think this kind of process where you are engaging with residents, where you are talking about what is possible, I think putting hard numbers to it, putting a real policy kind of framework around it, this is exactly the work that we need to be doing. And I think this is the kind of process that's going to result in more pressure being applied for legislators at every level to take action. And you know, I'm really excited to continue working with this coalition and to continue spreading the word of what we can do and what we must do in these coming weeks and months.
Walter, you heard in the last couple of moments, right, numbers from FISA, how the government, how local governments can work together and beyond. How is this landing for you?
Well, once again, thank you. And if I didn't tell you guys, thank you for letting me be part of this. Well, my question that I have now with everything that's being stated is, why haven't we put pressures on the bank as of now, or what is holding that up? And if this is what we're stating and this is how it's going to help me as a small landowner, I'm 100% backing everybody up, because I came with a different misconception of what's going on. And I think everything that everybody's doing is great, because this information needs to be out there. But how can we make this move faster now? Because there are people that need our help now. So what is really the holdup, and how can we put more pressure on those banks in order for us to go ahead and accomplish what I see that everybody's trying to accomplish here?
Mike, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, Walter. I think there has been some pressure on the banks, but not nearly enough.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, I think he froze again.
So I hear, Walter, a strong
Banking
sense of urgency
industry is not regulated by the ordinance to try to leverage our investments, and that's an important thing to do. But so much of that is at a different level of government. So I think it's important for not just those who are listening, but but those on the council, those in government, to be working with people to draw attention to those other levels of government, not as a pointing a finger of blame, but as a collective action with the grassroots saying, this is what we need to be doing. And in terms of the last question about who needs to be pressured, well, you've got the ear of 2 out of 15 council members. The conversations need to happen with the other 13. And what's important about this conversation and about this teach-in and the people being engaged in this conversation, it isn't that people are simply saying, hey, we need you we need you to cancel rent and mortgage. People are coming and saying, we have a detailed plan on how to do this. We've thought through all the details. And we even have the legal analysis, which public counsel has helped provide, about why you can do this. Part of what has made government reluctant locally is a fear that gets articulated a lot by our city attorneys that we are not allowed to do this. And a lot of times we hear from public counsel and from public interest lawyers that you do have the ability to do this. And I, for one, want to be listening to people who are saying, you know what, go ahead and do this because people need help.
I think we lost Mike.
Fanny, what are your thoughts? There was a sense of urgency in Walter. Mike was responding to that from your perspective as an organizer and tenant.
Sure, I feel like tenants like myself need to be protected during and after COVID-19. We need to stay housed during and after COVID to survive COVID. And just, I'm saying that it's easier said than done. I'm gonna say plain and simply, we need a recovery plan to remain in our homes, not to have to worry about having to pay the rent back that we can't pay because we can't work. I know of friends of mine that risk their lives, their health, their family just to go make some money, and they're putting their family at risk. They're getting sick with COVID. Yeah, and I don't want to go through that. It's really difficult as it was for me. Having experienced homelessness in the past, I don't want to go through that again. And so it's been very challenging during this pandemic. There was a point that I couldn't even function as a human being. And I get emotional just thinking about it, but I think I'm in a better place right now. Just being here with you guys and having this dialogue and being aware and conscious that many of us are going through this, and we need to be part of the recovery plan to survive COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. I want to, Mike, I think you were cut off in mid-thought, but do you want to finish your thought, maybe respond to what you just heard from Fanny?
Yeah, I think it sort of ties in. I want to thank Fanny for sharing again. I was talking about how we need to be talking to the other 13 council members, but also a very, very important place of influence is our city attorney's office. The legal counsel that we get, and this isn't exclusive to the city of Los Angeles, I think this is generally the case, is that we need to be concerned about the people who might sue us. And banks might sue us and landlords might sue us. And that builds in a bias in the system against helping people who have less power, who have a voice that is not as amplified. And we need to be shifting that paradigm. We have to realize that the people we represent and the people we're supposed to be helping are people like Fanny, are tenants in Los Angeles. And so what has been very crucial, I think, in this is the legal work that has been done by this coalition, which is giving people like me and will give people like Nithya the ability to make the legal argument that we can do this. We can make the argument that we should do this, but we also need to be able to make the argument that we can do this, and it's both right and legally proper.
Thank you, Mike. Legal, Faiza.
Sure. So I guess, thank you, Mike. I appreciate the shout out. I guess,
We have.
yeah, I think, you know, speaking from the legal side, you know, we talked a little bit about the police powers of the cities and counties and local governments, and they have their police powers are broad to protect the general welfare, and they are especially given latitude during emergencies. And I'll just point out that there have been lawsuits against the eviction moratoriums across the country by landlords, and they have not won a single one yet. The eviction moratoria have been upheld, and because courts are rightfully recognizing that this is an emergency. I mean, just recently in LA, a federal judge said this is worse than the Great Depression in denying a landlord injunction against the city of Los Angeles's eviction protections. It's worse, and he actually called it war, but for bloodshed. And landlords and tenants, through no fault of their own, have had to sacrifice. And so this is really the moment when we need local government to step up and take bold action. It's within their powers to suspend rent obligations. And so the pressure needs to be applied to the folks who can make it happen. And I really, really appreciated this honest dialogue between all of us, impacted tenants and homeowners, elected officials. I think we really are on the cusp. We're part of a national movement trying to make this happen. And so let's do it. I think it's essential because housing is literally life or death for people right now. And we need to do everything we can right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Faiza. And I just want to share, we've gone back and forth of sometimes up to 700 viewers tonight. We are right now in 568, I see here, like in our Zoom. Let's open it up to their questions. So I want to open that up. I want to invite Ruby Rivera, Director of Community Organizing with Inner City Struggle. Ruby, tell us, what are the questions in the chat?
Okay, so thank you very much for that. We are going to go with Damien's question from the chat. And Damien asks, well, Damien would love to hear Councilmember Bonin and the Councilmember-elect talk about how this demand fits within the Homes Guarantee LA needs.
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Thank you, Damien. For those who are unfamiliar, the Homes Guarantee is a series of housing proposals put together by a number of organizations around the country, People's Action, with some very strong partners here in Los Angeles, including Power and Ground Game. And they've got a number of different proposals, some of which are moving forward in Los Angeles. One of them is something I've been pushing, which is an idea to create social housing here in Los Angeles, which is publicly owned, run by a nonprofit or a land trust, mixed income, real genuine communities with a holistic investment, unlike the poor way that the United States has historically done public housing. It's a very different model, and it's very successful. And it's needed because the way we do housing in Los Angeles and the United States, it's something that people invest in, not something that people live in. It's become a commodity instead of a right. And it's beginning a pivot on that. And we need to be having a broader approach, a whole different structural framework for how we deal with housing issues, because the system right now isn't working. And the moment we're in, the approaches of the past are not suitable for the demands of this moment. And we need to look different, and we need to do bigger. And that's scary for a lot of people, legislators and non-legislators alike, because we haven't done it before. But this is, for me, I think, equivalent to what happened in this country societally and economically in the 1930s. And we emerged from the Great Depression, a very different country with a very different safety net. And I think this moment demands we do the same thing.
And Ruby, as you're queuing the next question, I'd like to give us a couple shout outs. We heard in our prior panelists today the need for, again, a lot of collaboration, and there's definitely collaboration interest in folks that are joining us. I want to give a shout out to Mayor-elect of Alhambra, Sasha Perez. Her and her staff are watching with a lot of interest this conversation. I see Council Member Daniel Lee from Culver City, Council Member Alex Fish from Culver City as well. Newly elected Council Member Constantine Anthony from Burbank, and also Mayor Alcantar from the city of Cudahy. And there's many more, but for now, I'm going to stop there on the shout outs, pass it back to you, Ruby, for the questions.
Okay, another question. So we've had a number of participants ask about what happens if their landlord doesn't want to participate. How is this program different than just providing rent relief, like the programs they've seen adopted at the city?
I guess I can take this one. So I think what's different in this with rent cancellation as opposed to the rental assistance program, and we've definitely heard a lot of cases of the landlords not accepting the rental assistance, and I think that kind of describes exactly why if the money is going to go to the landlords, and the landlord should be the one that apply for the assistance. And so in this, in our proposal, the rent cancellation is universal for the tenants who are experiencing hardship, and then landlords can then seek to apply to the landlord hardship fund. And for the landlords that are not eligible for the hardship fund, they can, we're proposing that additional process be set up for landlords that can show that it would be an unconstitutional application to their property. And that is the way that we're proposing to make sure that tenants don't fall through the cracks because their landlord won't accept.
Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to add to that?
And again, the question is, how is this program different than just providing rent relief?
As well as what happens if a landlord doesn't want to participate?
Yeah, I didn't catch that other part. Thank you, Ruby.
Well, you know, again, this is a different proposal from the one that we had thought about during the campaign. But one of the things I did want to talk about is that, you know, I think that making sure that some of the protections given to tenants are guaranteed, and that the additional payment is an incentive for landlords to participate rather than protections for tenants being a punishment for landlords to participate in the program would be a way in which this program might look different from the existing program at the city and might encourage more landlords to take part. And I don't know, Mike, if you can shed a little bit more light onto the current structure of the program, but I do think there was a little bit of a disincentive for landlords to participate in the way that the city's current rent relief program was structured, which I think both this program and thinking through other kinds of landlord-focused programs might be able to address.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues that existed with this one is people went through, tenants went through great effort to apply, and then even if they were selected for what was essentially, you know, a lottery, the landlord could still opt out. And that was a real problem in the system because a lot of people didn't even get the benefit. What I think is going to be a challenge going forward is with a hardship program for landlords is, I think one of the obstacles we will face, one of the objections we will face is that there will be a tremendous amount of skepticism that the program will work well that it will be nimble, that it will be quick, and that the hardship funds are actually dispersed. So making sure that there is a robust and a fast program so that the landlords who are suffering from a hardship actually feel confident that they are going to benefit from it, I think is going to be key to structuring this.
Ruby, I think we have room for 2 more questions. Is there one more? And then, of course, just looking at the time,
Yes.
right? But
So let me ask another question we have. This is from a council member from a small city in Los Angeles County, who is also a renter. How should city leaders from outside the city of LA support these efforts? Given our small budget, does it make sense to pursue rent cancellation and mortgage cancellation for those impacted by COVID-19 locally? Or is there political will at the county that we should continue to pressure? Is there a possibility that we will see an extension of the eviction moratorium at the county or state level? Should leaders take action locally? And I've pasted the question in the chat.
thank you. That's one question with many. Guadalupe, can you take a shot at answering first? And I'm happy to repeat the question too.
I know with our eviction moratorium, I mean, we've been able to have you know, an interest to establish it as a baseline, you know, where, you know, there's jurisdictions that don't have a program. So I could envision maybe, you know, if we were to do something like this, that, you know, that we would want to, again, work across the different jurisdictions to provide that relief across the different jurisdictions. And so, but again, you know, it's all in how it's designed and the resources. But definitely, it's important to be able to also, I think, for the small cities to gather support and because that, you know, when something like this is proposed, there may be, you know, again, you want to build, you know, just information about what the need is, you know, and I think that's very important from a small city, that they have those conversations as well. And, but in terms of the county, you know, if something, you know, of this sort were to be put together, I could envision that we would want to see how it could be, you know, put across the different jurisdictions and maybe working again with the city of Los Angeles during this COVID relief, you know, rounds of funding. We've been already having, we've had a collaboration effort between the city and the county. And so we can envision if we found a path to establish a similar collaboration to be able to, again, impact the whole county together.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And just to give everybody watching, again, we have 528 viewers. Who from small cities is here? Who from small cities is still interested? Guadalupe and team, know that we have present Belen Lamas from Council Member Marquise Harris Dawson's office. So Nithya and Mike. Who else should you be connecting? We have here a representative from Council Member Harris Dawson's office. Guadalupe and team, we have Councilmember John Erickson from West Hollywood, who is also joined by Mayor Lindsay Horvath from West Hollywood as well. And last but not least, because I just want to keep it short here, we have Bethany from Senator Maria Elena Durazo's office. So we have a couple of levels here. We have local government. Guadalupe, I hope you're writing them down, but if you're not, we're going to give them to you at the end.
I have.
Thank you. And Ruby, I know there was a lot of issues. Like,
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was another point to that question, but go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say, I think we have time for a final question. Okay, so this is our final question, and this one is coming from Nadia Abrica, who is a worker and member of SEIU 2015. Nadia tells us, I've heard from this presentation that the city and county are both waiting on federal relief, but that there is also a lot that they can do now. I cannot pay the 25%. I honestly do not know what I am going to do at the end of January. It takes a long time for laws to be passed by either the city or the county. Waiting to cancel rent until federal relief is available doesn't help anyone, not even the landlords, because the tenants can't pay right now. The only thing delaying the cancellation of rent will do is get people like me evicted. My question then is, can electeds and their representatives on the panel commit today to passing a policy now to implement the things they can do right now to save lives? And also to be well prepared so that when federal relief comes, we can help landlords and homeowners immediately. I've pasted the question into the chat.
Yeah, I can start by responding to this question. And SEIU 2015, I know, is the union of long-term caregivers who come to people's homes and care for them. And so these are the people who are going into other people's homes as part of their livelihood, putting themselves at risk for their job. So Nadia, thank you for the incredible work that you do and for the work that your union does. I think the question you're asking is incredibly important. And yes, I'm deeply committed to doing the work that we need to do in order to make sure that you are safe, that your health is secure, and that you're able to stay housed. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, not just with Guadalupe and with Mike, but with all of the other electeds that we heard called out from this entire region. And I'm really excited because this is now a conversation that we can all have together. And the more people are having this conversation, the more we're talking about this issue, the more we make it the most urgent thing for us to take action on. So I'm very much committed to doing this. Thank you.
And I'll chime in, as am I. I can't guarantee that we can get it passed because we'll need another 6 votes in order to do so. But I think we have a good shot at doing it, and I think we'll make a pretty strong effort at doing so. I would also say that sort of tying into the question previous is, I think it's really important for other cities to do the same as well. We have more ability to influence the cancel rent part of the equation than the cancel mortgage part of the equation. And the more cities that act collectively, simultaneously on the canceling rent and doing what they can on the canceling mortgages, the more pressure there is on the state of California to take action on the mortgage end. When we approved the $15 minimum wage in Los Angeles in 2015, we were the first. And then shortly after that, the county did so, and Santa Monica did so, and Long Beach did so. And what that did is it created a collective pressure on the state of California, and then it became the statewide standard. And if we in LA can go, if Culver City can go, if Long Beach can go, if all the other cities, West Hollywood, all the other cities on this call can go, it's going to create a momentum. It'll start providing some relief in the short term to people who are feeling the inability to make the 25% rent, but then it creates pressure on the state to do more and help on the other half of the equation.
I think, Guadalupe, would you like to respond before we pass it on to the next part of our agenda?
Definitely. In terms of, we are very much interested again in finding a pathway. And that's something that, we're very interested in. Again, I think I would echo, what Councilmember Bonin said. I think we would encourage the cities as well, to gather, because the more, that implement something of that sort, it has an ability to gain more traction. And but we are interested in definitely pursuing the pathway, in regards to that policy.
Thank you, folks. We are almost coming to an end, but I would hate to close without hearing from Fanny, a last thought from Fanny, and a last thought from from um, from our small landlord guest. So Fanny, you first.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be here and to listen to our stories, and to, you know, I guess to work with us. Many of the communities of people of color are the most impacted by COVID-19. We were already suffering prior, because of the lack of housing and the access to living with dignity. But as a tenant and as an organizer, I hear the stories, and I just want to say that we need to survive this. And in order to survive COVID-19, we need rent cancellation. We need to stop stressing over either risking our life to go work and pay the rent, or living with the idea that you might be homeless in a couple of months because, you know, you're not going to have money to pay the rent or to catch up. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Fanny. Walter? Walter?
Yes, sorry. Thank you once again. I appreciate how you pronounce my name too, by the way.
Walter or Walter?
Yeah, Walter.
Ah, mira. I should have asked you at the beginning.
No, that's always good.
Walter.
I really appreciate it. It started
Qué
that way,
bueno.
so I really appreciate it much. Well, thank you once again for opening my eyes. I really feel that this is a great conversation. The more we have it, it seems that we could get through these very bad times. At times, it feels that things stack up. And I just wanted to thank everybody. I do feel that small landowners should get together, and if there's any way that we could pressure banks together, I think that that would be one of the ways that we could help everybody out as well. So in that sense, if there's anything that we could do. Also, once again, thank you for allowing me to be here with everybody. And I thank you once again for hearing me out. And once again, thank you for opening our eyes and bringing everything to light. And I appreciate everybody.
No, thank you, Walter. So everyone watching, we are at over 486 participants. We are at 7:23 p.m. You heard from our 6 amazing guests. You heard the desire to continue working, not just here within Healthy LA, but in your local communities. We can be the first region to do this, and we are going to do it together. So I want to pass it now to Natalie Godinez with Self-Help Graphics and Arts, also a member of Healthy LA, for the next part of our agenda. Natalie?
Thank you, Pam. So we are super excited to have elected officials supporting our platform, but we need to pressure all electeds to work with us. So we would ask you to please sign the petition we have on our website. We will be putting the link in the chat. Claudia, thank you for putting the link in the chat. And with this, you'll be reaching out to your elected officials to let them know that this issue matters to you. So it's healthyla.org /pledge. And also, we would love if you could just retweet us. We just tweeted graphics about this platform that have information that we shared today. So just repost them and tag your elected officials. So anybody who represents you in your community, please tag them on Twitter so they get to hear from you. And then also, lastly, we would love it if you could make official public comment on this issue. So next Tuesday is the last County Board of Supervisors meeting of the year, and they will be voting on extending and strengthening eviction protection starting February. This is great because as we know, there's a lot of people who still need protection, but it still does not give full protections for rent debt. So if people don't pay 25% of the rent they owe from September to January, they can be evicted. So we need support to support this motion, but we also need to demand the cancellation of rents and mortgages. You can comment online, and you can also call in the time of the meeting. And if you're a tenant or a homeowner in a really difficult situation, let your representatives know that they need to stand up for you. It's really important. Your voice is really important. There's been some links dropped in the chat for you to take action. And with that, I will pass it over to Pastor Q to close us off.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you to everyone who shared. Thank you to everyone who participated in this conversation, a timely conversation and a needed conversation. I'm reminded of Dr. King. Dr. King said, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. And so COVID is over a year old, and I am really having anxiety right now because I feel like we're moving too slow. We know that because of inequity, a lot of people at the bottom are the ones dealing with the brunt of this pandemic. We know that folks with the higher income we've heard are not affected. We know that prior to COVID-19, 2 people were dying per day on the streets. Now 4 people are dying per day on the street. If folks don't get assistance, and if they don't get it now, it will be a death sentence. You will be like me listening to Ike, who came to me on one Thursday night and said, Pastor, I had a seizure and I flatlined, and the pandemics were able to bring me back. And I rejoiced with Ike only to have him die of hyperthermia 2 weeks later across the street. So I say, unless we get this done, this is a death sentence. Leaving people on the street is a death sentence. And we don't pull teeth when it comes to giving law enforcement money. We find it somewhere. So we better find resources to help those who are in need. They are not comfortable. They're not waiting. They've been waiting. They've been waiting for over a year. We need action, and we need it yesterday. Thank you.